Why was the room suddenly so quiet? The hum of the fluorescent lights, once just background noise, now seemed like a presence of its own buzzing, watching, amplifying the tension that had settled over the medical station. Staff Sergeant Rebecca. Chun had been through this routine thousands of times. 15 years of service, thousands of recruits, thousands of bodies lined up, examined, checked, and cleared. Each one different. Each one, somehow, the same. She thought she had seen it. All. Tattoos that screamed rebellion, burns that whispered shame, scars that told stories of bad neighborhoods, worse families, accidents that could not be untangled from memory. But nothing in those years had prepared her for the girl who now stood before her. Maria Vasquez, 19 years old, black hair tied neatly back, plain clothes that were too carefully pressed for someone so young, too deliberate, as if she wanted to disappear into the fabric of normalcy. Her face was calm, almost still, but her eyes betrayed something else. They were older than 19. Older than many of the soldiers who had bled out on distant battlefields. They carried a weight no one her age should have to carry. "Next," Chun had called, her clipboard steady in her hands, her voice clipped with the discipline of routine. The girl had stepped forward, her movements precise, almost practiced. She handed over her paperwork. Her hands were steady, but not completely. A tremor betrayed her. Chun had seen that tremor before in boys who had faced abuse, and girls who had survived things no one spoke about aloud. The kind of tremor that came not from weakness, but from carrying something too heavy, too long. The physical was supposed to be routine. Height, weight, vision, posture, scars, medical history. Nothing personal, nothing emotional. And yet, this. One detail: the shirt. Always the shirt. "I'll need you to remove your shirt for the torso inspection," Chun said, her tone professional, rehearsed. "You can keep your bra on." Maria didn't move. Not right away. Her fingers hovered at the hem of the fabric, then froze there. Chun's eyes narrowed. "Is there a problem?" A pause. A silence that stretched. "No, ma'am," but her hands still didn't move. Chun had learned to read hesitation. She knew what shame looked like, what trauma whispered. She softened, just slightly. "Take your time." And that was when the door opened. Colonel James Davidson stepped inside, his boots striking the linoleum with a weight that carried decades of service. At 52, his very presence commanded silence. Silver hair, rigid posture, the kind of aura that made nervous recruits straighten without even realizing it. He was the kind of man who had delivered folded flags into the hands of crying mothers, who had stood in burning streets halfway around the world and pulled bloodied soldiers back into the fight. "How are we doing in here, Sergeant Chun?" His voice carried authority, but also something steadier, a reassurance most recruits clung to. Chun straightened instinctively. "Just beginning the physical examination, sir." But her eyes flicked back to Maria. The girl was rigid now, her eyes darting between Chun and the colonel, her fingers still gripping the edge of her shirt. And then, softly, almost too softly, "I need you to know. What you're about to see, it's not what you think." The words landed heavy, carving the air into something sharp. Chun frowned. "What do you mean?" But Maria didn't answer, not with words. Instead, she drew a long breath, squared her shoulders, and with one swift, deliberate motion, yanked her shirt upward. The silence that followed was absolute. The scar stretched across her abdomen like something carved into stone. Thick, rope-like ridges, brutal in their clarity. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't the work of surgery. It wasn't even the reckless violence Chun had seen from gang fights or drunken stabbings. No, this was different. This was deliberate, precise. The mark of someone who had wanted not to kill, but to destroy. The clipboard slipped from Chun's hands, clattering to the floor. Behind her, she heard it, the sharp intake of the colonel's breath. The step backward, boots scraping against tile. And when she turned, she saw something she I'd never seen before. Colonel Davidson, decorated, hardened, unshaken even in the face of death, looked away, his jaw clenched, his fists balled tight. He could not hold her gaze. "Dear God," he whispered. His voice cracked under the weight of it. "What happened to you?" Maria stood perfectly still, her shirt still raised, her gaze fixed somewhere above their heads, beyond the sterile ceiling, beyond this moment. Her breathing was steady, almost practiced, as though she had rehearsed this reveal over and over. In her mind, "I survived," she said simply. The words carried more power than any uniform, any medal, a declaration, not of victory, but of endurance. Chun forced herself to look again, to see not just the wound, but the story it carved into the girl's flesh. This wasn't just scar tissue. It was a record, a warning, a challenge. "You can put your shirt down," Chun said finally, her voice softer than it had been all morning. Maria lowered the fabric slowly, smoothing it down as if nothing had happened. There was no shame in her posture, no embarrassment. If anything, a strange relief, as if she had finally shown them a burden she had carried far too long. "I suppose," she said, almost flatly, "you'll want the full story." Colonel Davidson swallowed hard. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady now, determined. "Only if you're comfortable sharing it." Maria gave a small, humorless laugh. "Comfortable isn't a word I use anymore, sir." She folded her hands in her lap. Chun noticed how they trembled. "Just slightly. But you need to understand what you're dealing with if you're going to make a decision about my enlistment." Chun pulled a chair close. The clipboard was forgotten. Protocols forgotten? This wasn't a physical exam anymore. This was something else. "Take your time," she said gently. Maria's eyes dropped to her hands, and then the words began to flow. "I was 17. She spoke of El Paso, of her grandmother dying in Juarez, of the trip that should have been safe, of 3 men waiting by a bus station, of the van, of waking up in a warehouse with other girls, some younger, some older, all terrified." She spoke with precision. 8 months, 2 weeks, 3 days, each moment carved into memory. Each one counted and recounted until the numbers were branded into her. She described the scar. Not random violence, but punishment. A lesson meant to shatter her. A machete wielded with knowledge of anatomy. Deep enough to scar forever. Careful enough to keep her alive. The colonel's fists stayed clenched. His jaw stayed locked. Chun's eyes burned, though she tried to blink it away. When Maria lifted her shirt again to trace the scar, her voice didn't waver. "They said it would remind me every day that I belonged to them. That even if I escaped, I'd never be free." Her eyes hardened, just for a moment. They were wrong. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was something else, something heavier. "Who did this?" Davidson asked, his voice low. "They called him El Carnicero," she answered. "The butcher." Her voice didn't crack, it didn't falter, but her hands trembled again as she folded them back into her lap. Chun felt something shift inside her chest, a mix of horror, of grief, of admiration. This girl wasn't just telling them a story. She was putting a weapon on the table and daring them to recognize it. And somewhere, in the silence that followed, a thought began to take shape. This wasn't just a scar, it was a declaration, and it was only the beginning. What kind of 17-year-old remembers every day of captivity with precision? The answer was in her eyes, the same eyes that had unsettled Chun the moment Maria walked in. "I never made it to my grandmother's house," Maria said her voice quiet but steady, like someone pulling words out of a wound. 3 men grabbed me just 2 blocks from the bus station. They dragged me into a van. When I woke up, I was in a warehouse outside the city. I wasn't alone." Chun leaned forward without realizing it. "There were other girls," Maria continued. "Some as young as 14, a few in their 20s. All of us tied to the border in some way. American citizens, daughters of immigrants, girls who could be sold for more because we belonged on both sides." She paused, inhaling slowly, carefully. Her breathing had a pattern. Chun realized, controlled, practiced. A technique to keep herself from drowning in her own story. Colonel Davidson didn't move. He stood rooted in place, his frame tense, as though holding himself still against the storm he saw forming in the girl's words. Human trafficking, Maria said finally. She let the word hang there like a blade. The worst kind, not just for sex. We were forced into everything. Labor, drugs, laundering, whatever made them money. The operation was too big to understand at first, but later, I learned. They were moving over 200 girls a year through that network. Chun felt her stomach twist. She thought of her own daughter, 15 and naive, who still believed the world was mostly good. She forced the image away. Davidson's jaw tightened. How long were you there? 8 months, 2 weeks, 3 days, Maria answered without hesitation. The precision struck harder than any hesitation could have. She had counted every day, every night, every breath. She looked down at her hands. The scar came during my third escape attempt. Her voice wavered for the first time, but only for a heartbeat. They called it a lesson. She lifted her shirt again, just enough for the jagged ridge of scar tissue to catch the light. They wanted to break me, but keep me alive, functional, useful. They used a machete. Her words were clinical, detached, a report, not a confession. But her eyes betrayed her. Somewhere beneath the steel, there was still the girl who had screamed into the dark. They knew exactly how deep to cut, Maria continued. How to avoid organs. How to make sure it never healed clean. They said it would mark me forever. They said every time I looked in the mirror, I'd know I belonged to them. Her eyes flicked up, sharp now, steady. They were wrong. Chun felt her throat tighten. She wanted to reach out, to cover the girl's trembling hands with her own. But she stayed still. Discipline fought instinct. Davidson's voice was quieter now, stripped of command. How did you get out? Maria let the silence stretch. Then she said, an FBI raid. Mexican Federal Police. They'd been watching for 2 years. They moved in with helicopters, tactical teams. Like something out of a movie. But they were almost too late. 3 girls had been killed the week before. The words landed heavy. Murdered because they became too much trouble. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. Their names were Sophia, Carmen, and Isabella. Sophia was 15. She wanted to be a teacher. Carmen was 19 like me, and she had a baby girl she was trying to get back to. Isabella was 17. She sang to us when the nights got too dark. For the first time, tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't look away, didn't hide them. They died because no one came in time, Maria whispered. I lived because someone did, and now I want to be the one who comes for the others. The room was silent. Only the buzzing light filled the space between their breaths. Chun swallowed hard, but her voice still shook when she spoke. Maria, you don't have to carry all of this alone. Maria's gaze sharpened. I don't carry it alone. I carry it for them. That's different. Davidson finally moved, stepping closer, though his face was still tight with restraint. You want to enlist? Why? Because, Maria said, her voice growing harder. The network that took me was just one part of something bigger. Hundreds of warehouses, thousands of girls. They're getting smarter, stronger. They know the system better than the people. Trying to fight them, but I know them from the inside. I know how they think, how they operate. The FBI told me they need people like me. But I told them I wanted military intelligence, not just investigation, action, precision, reach. Her eyes burned now, not with tears but with fire. I want to dismantle every piece of their empire. I want to be the nightmare El Carnicero never stops running from. The colonel studied her in silence. In his mind, regulations collided with instinct. Risk with necessity. He saw the scar again, remembered his own first reaction. The way he had turned away, ashamed of his own weakness. But now, when he looked at her, he saw something else. She wasn't a victim asking for refuge. She was a weapon asking for deployment, and that terrified him. Chun broke the silence. "Sir, with respect, this isn't standard. She's been through trauma no one walks away from clean. PTSD, survivor's guilt, triggers in the field. What happens when she breaks? What happens to her unit?" Her words were sharp because they came from care. Care for Maria. Care for the soldiers she would stand beside. Davidson didn't answer right away. He looked past them, out the window, where recruits were jogging in formation under the Georgia sun. Boys and girls chanting cadences, their voices still bright, still untouched by darkness. What if she's the one who keeps others from ending up like Sophia, Carmen, and Isabella? He said finally. Before Chun could respond, the door opened. A woman stepped in mid-50s, composed, with the kind of calm presence born only from years of sitting across from broken men and women. Dr. Patricia Reeves, chief psychologist of the base. I couldn't help overhearing, she said, closing the door behind her. "You're discussing Vasquez," Chun blinked. "You know her?" "Dr." Reeves nodded. "She's been on my radar for 2 years. I've been consulting with her civilian therapist, with her permission." Davidson raised an eyebrow. And she's remarkable," Reeves said simply. She placed a thick folder on the table. "In 25 years of practice, I've never seen someone recover from that level of trauma with such purpose. Most survivors struggle to function at all." Maria finished her GED, learned 3 languages and certifications in crisis counseling, and has already been consulting with the FBI. Chun shook her head. "That doesn't change the fact that she's a psychological risk." "Actually," Reeves countered, sliding the folder open, "it does. She hasn't just survived her trauma, she's weaponized it. Look at B's assessments. Stress tolerance, situational awareness, threat detection, emotional regulation under pressure. She's in the top 1% across the board." Davidson flipped through the pages. His eyes widened slightly. "The FBI has tried to recruit her for 2 years, Reeves added. "But she insisted on military service first." Chun frowned. "Why?" "Because she knows," Reeves said quietly, "that dismantling these networks requires more than investigation. It requires operations, military precision, reach the FBI doesn't have." Through the window, movement caught their eyes. A group of recruits had stopped running. One had collapsed from heat exhaustion. The others milled in confusion. Then, a blur of motion, Maria. She sprinted from the waiting area toward the fallen recruit, kneeling, checking his pulse, his breathing, barking. Orders in English, then Spanish, pulling the others into a coordinated response. Shade, water, medical assistance. Within seconds, the chaos became order. She's had medical training too, Reeves observed. Emergency response, trauma care. She volunteered with Border Patrol medical units after her recovery. They watched her, transfixed. Even at a distance, her leadership was unmistakable. Others followed her instinctively. "She saves people," Reeves said softly. The silence in the room shifted again. This time, it wasn't disbelief or horror. It was recognition. Chun looked at Maria outside. The girl who had carried a scar that could silence even a colonel. The girl who now commanded recruits without a uniform or rank. The girl who had already chosen her war. And somewhere inside, Chun felt the first flicker of fear. Not of Maria's weakness, but of her strength. Because strength like that, forged in suffering, could either save lives or destroy them. What made a soldier fit to serve? Training? Discipline? Resilience? Colonel Davidson had asked himself that question countless times across his career, but never had the answer felt so complicated. Maria Vasquez was outside, waiting, sitting quietly, with her paperwork in hand, but even from here, he could feel her presence like a storm pressing at the door. Inside the examination room, the air was taut, Reeves stood with her file. Calm but insistent, Chun's posture was rigid, arms crossed, every muscle tense. Davidson himself remained near the window, staring at the training field where the girl had just organized recruits with the instinct of a leader. Finally, Chun broke the silence. "Sir, we cannot seriously be considering this. Regulations exist for a reason. The psychological risks. I know the regulations." "Sergeant." Davidson's tone was firm, but not dismissive. He turned, his face shadowed by something deeper than command. "Uncertainty. I've enforced them my entire career. But this is not in any manual. She's a trauma case." Chun's voice cracked with urgency. "You saw her hands trembling. You heard her story. PTSD doesn't vanish just because she says she wants to fight. What happens when the trauma resurfaces mid-mission? What happens to her team when she freezes or breaks?" Reeves's voice cut through, calm but sharp. "Or what happens if she doesn't break? What if her trauma has become the very thing that makes her stronger than anyone else?" Chun turned on her. "You can't honestly believe trauma makes someone fit for combat." "Not always," Reeves admitted. "But sometimes, yes. Maria isn't avoiding her pain. She's mastered it. She's learned to use it. You saw the tests. Stress tolerance, threat detection, she's off the charts. She doesn't collapse under pressure. She sharpens." Davidson said nothing. He was still staring out at the field, where Maria had knelt beside the collapsed recruit. He replayed the moment in his mind, the way she'd moved without hesitation, the way the others had followed her, natural, commanding, as if she'd been waiting for that exact crisis her entire life. Chun's voice softened, but the steel remained. "Sir, I know you want to believe she's different, but the battlefield is unforgiving. If we put her out there and she falters, even once, it's not just her life on the line. It's her team. You've seen what happens when soldiers bring their ghosts into combat." Davidson turned. His voice was quiet now, thoughtful. "And you've seen what happens when soldiers fight without ghosts. They break, too. The question isn't whether she carries pain. It's whether she carries it with purpose." The room went silent. Reeves stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There's something else. The man who did that to her El Carnicero. He's still out there. He escaped the raid. The FBI believes he's rebuilt his operation. 50 disappearances in the past 18 months tied to his network." Davidson's eyes narrowed. "And she knows this?" Reeves nodded. "She identified him from surveillance footage last month. She's been working with Agent Martinez. Quietly, she's been helping track him. But the FBI can't move the way we can. They can't go where we can. Maria knows this." Chun's face paled. "So this is revenge." Reeves's gaze didn't waver. "It's justice, and maybe revenge. But tell me, what's the difference when the enemy is still taking lives?" Davidson closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of Sophia, Carmen, Isabella, names that weren't even his to carry, but that now felt heavy on his chest. He thought of Maria's scar, of how he had turned away. He thought of the way she had sighed. "I survived." A sharp knock at the door broke the silence. "Enter," Davidson called. The door opened, and Maria stepped back inside. Her posture was straight, her eyes steady. She had no idea what verdict awaited her. And yet she walked in with the poise of someone who had already accepted her fate. Chun looked at her and felt an ache she couldn't explain. Half of her wanted to shield this girl from the horrors she would surely face if enlisted. The other, half an unspoken part, knew Maria might already have faced worse. Davidson studied her for a long moment. "Vasquez, why should I let you in? Why should I take the risk?" Maria didn't answer right away. She let the silence hang, measured and deliberate. Then she said, "Because I've already been where your soldiers fear to go. And I came back. If I don't use that, then Sophia, Carmen, Isabella, they died for nothing. If you turn me away, I'll still fight. But with you, I can save more lives." Her voice didn't waver. Chun saw something then that startled her. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't desperation. It was resolve. The kind that came from knowing the worst had already happened, and everything after was survival. Davidson exhaled slowly. For a brief moment, he looked tired, older. Then he straightened, the decision crystallizing in his eyes. "You'll have your chance," he said. Maria didn't flinch, didn't smile. She simply nodded, as though she had expected nothing less. Reeves looked relieved. Chun, conflicted. Davidson, steady now. "Understand this," Davidson continued, his voice regaining its edge. "This won't be easy. You will be tested harder than anyone else. Not because of your past, but because of your potential. You want to fight a war against shadows that requires more than scars. It requires discipline, precision, control." "I understand, sir. Do you?" Davidson pressed. "Because this isn't about vengeance. It isn't about one man. It's about every soldier beside you. If you break, they break. If you fail, they pay the price. Can you carry that?" Maria's hand brushed her abdomen, almost unconsciously. She looked him directly in the eyes. "I already carry them," she said softly. "Every day." Davidson studied her for another long beat. Then he turned to Reeves. "Begin accelerated. Processing. Specialized training track." Chun's eyes widened. "Sir." Davidson held up a hand. "Sergeant, I've seen soldiers join for money, for adventure, for lack of options. But the ones who change the course of battles, they fight for something bigger than themselves. That girl out there, she's already chosen her war. The question is whether we're smart enough to let her fight it with us." Chun swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, but something inside her faltered, because when she looked at Maria, she didn't see fragility anymore. She saw fire. Reeves closed the file with a quiet snap. Then it settled. Maria didn't move, didn't speak. She simply waited, calm and still, like someone who had been preparing for this exact moment her entire life. Davidson gave a small nod. "Welcome to the fight, Vasquez." And for the first time since she'd walked into the room, Maria allowed herself the faintest smile. But beneath it, in the depths of her eyes, something darker lingered. Something even Davidson didn't fully understand yet. The scar was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. Why was everyone staring at her during drills? The answer was simple, though no one dared say it out loud. Maria Vasquez wasn't like the others. The first weeks of training blurred together in sweat, grit, and repetition. Obstacle courses that left bodies broken down and blistered. Early mornings when breath froze in the cold air, and the only sound was boots pounding earth in unison. Nights when exhaustion turned even the strongest recruits into hollow shells. But Maria didn't break. She didn't lead chants like some of the louder ones. She didn't boast about endurance or complain about bruises. She simply endured, her silence carrying more weight than shouts ever could. And the others noticed. "Why doesn't she talk?" One recruit muttered as they scrubbed floors. "She's cold." Another whispered during weapons drills, like she doesn't even feel it. But Maria felt it. Every blister, every ache, every burning muscle. She felt the stares too. The ones that said she doesn't belong. Sometimes she caught Staff Sergeant Chun watching her from a distance. Chun had been pulled into her specialized training track. Though neither of them spoke about that first day in the medical bay, Chun was hard on her, harder than the others. Maria thought, always pushing, always watching for cracks. Maria understood. Chun wasn't cruel. She was testing, and yet, in the quiet moments, Maria sometimes wondered if Chun's eyes weren't just searching for weakness, but for proof that this girl with a scar carved across her abdomen could really stand beside soldiers who had never known chains. The scar itself remained hidden beneath uniforms, but Maria could feel it there, pulsing against fabric with every stretch, every lift. Some nights in the barracks, she would lie awake while others slept, tracing its path with her fingers. The machete, the laughter, the smell of that warehouse. She learned not to close her eyes too long. But when doubts came, she remembered 3 names: Sophia, Carmen, Isabella, as she kept moving one morning. During hand-to-hand training, it all surfaced. Her opponent, a male recruit, broad-shouldered. Cocky snickered as they squared off. "Don't worry," he said under his breath. "I won't break you." The words hit harder than his fists, Maria's. Body moved before her mind caught up. A block, a twist, a strike sharper than instinct. She drove him into the mat with such force that even the drill instructor froze. The boy wheezed for air, clutching his ribs. Silence filled the room. Maria stepped back, chest heaving, fists trembling. She hadn't just won. She had unleashed. Chun's eyes found hers across the room. Sharp, concerned, searching, Maria turned away. She hated herself in that moment, not because of what she'd done, but because part of her had enjoyed it. Later, when the others whispered about her, about the quiet girl who fought like a cornered animal, Maria sat alone, staring at her. Hands, they were steady now, but she remembered them trembling when she told her story. She wondered which version of herself was truer. Days turned to weeks. The physical trials never ended. Weapons, endurance, tactics, language drills, Maria absorbed everything. She memorized floor plans in seconds, dismantled rifles blindfolded, ran miles until her lungs burned. Still, whispers followed her. "She doesn't sleep. She doesn't. Smile. She's not like us." And maybe they were right one night. Chun found her alone at the edge of the training field, sitting in silence beneath the stars. "You can't keep carrying it like this," Chun said, stepping closer. Maria didn't look up. "Carrying what?" "The weight," Chun said simply. "Of everything, the scar, the memories, the silence. You think it makes you strong. Maybe it does, but it also isolates you. Out there," she gestured to the empty field, "you'll need people beside. You trust, Maria, not just endurance." Maria finally looked at her. "Trust is how I got the scar." The words were blunt, hard, but beneath them, Chun saw the truth. The girl wanted to trust. She just didn't know if she could. Chun didn't push further. She simply sat beside her, silent. Sometimes silence spoke louder than advice. Weeks later, the first field exercise arrived. A mock raid, recruits split into teams. Given intelligence, tasked with infiltrating a compound under simulated fire. Maria's team hesitated. Leadership was unclear. Voices clashed, plans unraveled, until Maria spoke. Her voice cut through the confusion, calm, sharp, deliberate. She assigned positions, anticipated threats, identified escape routes. Her team followed without question, as though her certainty was a compass. The instructors watched closely. Davidson among them, his arms folded, his face unreadable. When the exercise ended, Maria's team had completed the mission faster than any other. No casualties, no wasted movements, precision. But Davidson's expression wasn't victory. It was contemplation, because he knew precision born from trauma could be both gift and danger. Later, when the recruits celebrated small victories, Maria stood apart, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't join in the laughter. She smiled at their joy, but it felt distant, like a memory from another life. Still, something shifted. Her teammates no longer whispered doubts. They began to seek her guidance, quietly, carefully. They started to trust her. And Maria, though reluctant, began to trust them back. A little, but in the shadows of her mind, one truth never left her. El Carnicero was still out there, breathing, cutting, owning other lives the way he had once tried to own hers. Every push-up, every mile, every weapon she cleaned, it was all for them, the unseen, the unnamed, the ones waiting in darkness. And one night, as she lay in her bunk tracing her scar in the dark, she whispered their names: Sophia, Carmen, Isabella, the girls who hadn't made it out. She whispered, too, the name of the man who had carved her. El Carnicero, she breathed. A vow, not a memory. Somewhere he was still laughing. But Maria knew something he didn't. The scar he had given her was no longer a mark of his power. It was the blade she would use against him. And in the silence of the barracks, with moonlight slicing across her face, Maria finally understood. She wasn't training to become a soldier. She was training to become his reckoning. Why was her heart so steady as the transport rattled through the night? She had expected fear, expected her hands to tremble as the briefing words were played in her mind. But instead calm, cold, measured, Maria Vasquez sat with her team, the hum of the aircraft vibrating through her bones. Her first live operation, not training, not simulation, reality. The target, a suspected safe house linked to cartel trafficking routes. Intelligence suggested women were being held there. Awaiting transport, time was thin. Davidson had hesitated to greenlight her inclusion. Chum had argued openly against it, but Reeves had insisted, and Maria herself had stood silent, letting the weight of her readiness speak louder than words. Now she was here, across from her. A ranger adjusted his rifle. A Navy operator checked comms. Experienced men, hardened faces, and in between them her, young, female, scarred. She felt their eyes when they thought she wasn't looking. Some curious, some doubtful, some quietly impressed after training drills where she had outlasted them all. But none of them knew the truth. The scar beneath her vest wasn't her weakness. It was her compass. The team leader gave a final rundown. Target is a single-story compound. Expect 10 to 15 armed. Secondary objective, extraction of civilians. Rules of engagement are clear. Minimal collateral, maximum speed. Maria nodded with the others, but inside, something different turned. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't just about orders. Somewhere behind those walls might be girls, like Sophia, Carmen, Isabella. And if she was too slow, too late, she gripped her weapon tighter. The aircraft slowed, altitude dropping, the ramp lowered. Night air swept in, thick and humid, carrying the smell of earth and oil. Boots hit dirt, shadows swallowed them. The team moved like water, silent, efficient. Maria followed, every sense alive. The scar beneath her armor felt like it was burning, pulling her toward what waited ahead. The compound appeared out of the dark. Faint lights, a fence line, guards posted. Her heartbeat remained steady. Not fast, not frantic, steady, like a drum she had carried her whole life. They closed in. The breach team prepared explosives. And then movement. A guard stepped into view. Earlier than expected. Too soon. He reached for his radio. Maria didn't think. She moved. A suppressed shot cut through the night. Clean and precise. The man dropped before sound could escape his throat. Silence again. The others looked at her. Briefly, no words, just a nod, acceptance. The breach went hot, doors blew inward, chaos exploded. Gunfire ripped through hallways, shouts in Spanish, the thunder of boots on concrete. Maria moved with her team, clearing rooms, corners, spaces carved with shadows. Her body reacted faster than thought, like the training had burned itself into her bones, and then she froze, not in fear, in recognition. A door kicked open, and she saw them. Girls. 4 of them. Terrified. Shackled. Their eyes wide in the same way her eyes had once been wide, staring up at fluorescent lights in a warehouse. Her breath caught. For a moment, she wasn't in the compound. She was 17 again. The smell of sweat, rust, and fear pressing in. The sound of footsteps approaching, the machete glinting. Vasquez. Someone barked. Her head snapped back. Reality slammed into her chest. She moved, weapon lowered. Hand steady. Spanish poured from her lips, calm, commanding. Estamos aquí, hasta en salvo. We're here. You're safe. The girls didn't move at first, but her voice anchored them. She holstered her weapon, cut their bindings with a blade, her hands firm, not shaking. One of the girls, no older than 15, grabbed her wrist. eyes searching, desperate. Maria held her gaze. "I survived," she whispered. "You will too." The moment ended in a rush of footsteps. Gunfire echoed again down the hall. The team pressed forward. Maria ushered the girls behind cover, signaling extraction. But the fight wasn't over. The compound's last defenders rallied near the back. Bullets tore into walls, splinters rained. The team hunkered low. Maria's eyes caught movement through a narrow doorway. A man shouting orders, directing fire, and she froze again. For a second, she thought it was him. El Carnicero, the butcher, the build, the posture, the scar across his cheek. Her stomach turned to ice. The man disappeared into smoke before she could be sure. Her breath shook once, only once. Then she steadied herself and pressed on. Minutes later, it was over. The compound cleared, civilians escorted out, armed men bound or dead. The mission was declared a success. But Maria didn't feel success. On the extraction vehicle, sitting among rescued girls, she felt their fear pressing into her. One clutched her arm, refusing to let go. Another sobbed quietly into her shoulder. Maria held them, silent, her own. Eyes fixed on the dark horizon, the team celebrated in low voices. Another raid, another victory, numbers checked, objectives met, but Maria wasn't counting numbers. She was counting faces, the ones she had saved, and the ones still hidden in other warehouses, other shadows, and the face she thought she had seen. The butcher, back at base. Reports were filed. Commendations whispered. Even Davidson allowed a flicker of pride as he watched her move among the rescued, speaking softly in their language, giving them the words she once needed to hear. But later, alone in her quarters, Maria stood before the mirror. She lifted her shirt, traced the scar, and whispered again, this time not a vow, but a question. "Are you still out there?" A reflection didn't answer, but in the silence, she knew, yes, he was. And that meant this mission, this success was only the beginning. Why did commanders speak her name with both pride and unease? Maria Vasquez had become the kind of soldier who drew whispers in briefing rooms. Months had passed since the compound raid. Official reports listed her as an asset, precise, calm, unshakable under fire. Teams trusted her judgment. Intelligence officers trusted her instincts. Even the civilians she rescued clung to her as though her voice alone held the power to drag them back from nightmares. But with each mission, Davidson noticed something deeper. Maria was not fighting for ribbons or ranks. Every time she stepped into danger, she carried an invisible weight, names whispered in the dark, scars that guided her hand like a compass pointing toward vengeance. He watched carefully. He had once doubted her, once almost denied her enlistment. Now he saw both the brilliance of his decision and the danger of it. The danger revealed itself one night in a briefing room. As intelligence streamed in from Central America, a projector cast grainy footage on the wall, men unloading trucks. Women herded into shadows, and there, briefly caught by the camera, a tall figure with a scar along his cheek. Maria stiffened. The room kept murmuring, analysts debating supply routes and funding lines. But Davidson saw her shoulders lock, saw the way her breathing shifted. She didn't blink, didn't move, until finally her whisper cut through the chatter. "It's him." The room fell silent. "Who?" An officer asked. "El Carnicero," Maria said flatly. "The man who cut me." The words froze the air. "Are you sure?" Davidson asked carefully, her jaw clenched. "I'd know him anywhere." The image flickered, then was gone. But it didn't matter. He was real again, not just a name in memory, not just a phantom in the dark. The butcher was alive. From that night on, something changed. Maria trained harder, longer. Hours passed when others collapsed. She studied maps until her eyes blurred, traced networks of names and routes across walls of intelligence files. She spoke less, smiled never. Chun noticed. Reeves noticed. Davidson noticed most of all. One evening, Davidson called her into his office. Papers littered his desk, maps, files, blurred photos from surveillance. "You're wearing yourself down," he said. "I'm readying myself." Maria replied, "For what?" For him, her voice was ice. Davidson leaned forward. "This isn't about him. It's bigger. Networks, organizations. You know that." Her eyes met his, dark, sharp. "He is the network. He's their face. Their hands, their blade. If I cut him down, everything he built fractures." Davidson studied her. He had seen that fire before, in men chasing enemies across deserts, jungles, cities. Fire could win battles. Fire could also consume the one carrying it. "Listen to me, Lieutenant," he said finally, steady. "You want him, I know, but don't let him dictate your war. The moment you make it personal, you lose sight of the mission." Maria's voice didn't rise, but something in it hardened. "It's always been personal, sir. The only difference is now I can act." He saw her hand twitch unconsciously toward her abdomen, where the scar lay hidden beneath fabric. Davidson sighed. He wanted to tell her to let go, to fight only for the mission. But he also knew the truth. Sometimes, the ones who carried personal scars were the only ones who fought to the end. After she left, Chun stepped into his office. Arms folded. "She's unraveling," Chun said. "No," Davidson countered quietly. "She's sharpening," Chun frowned. "Sir, she's obsessed. You know where obsession leads." Davidson looked out the window. Outside, Maria was running the track alone, her body a blur in the dusk. Not slowing, not stopping. "Obsession can break a soldier," he said softly, "or it can make one unstoppable. The question is which you be." The answer came sooner than expected. Weeks later, intelligence confirmed it. El Carnithero was not only alive, but had rebuilt his network, a compound in Honduras. 43 missing persons believed to be inside. The data was clear, the urgency sharper. Davidson gathered his team. Maria stood at the head of the room now, not as a recruit, not as a survivor, but as a leader. Her uniform crisp, her voice steady. Her scar no longer a secret, but a weapon revealed when needed. She clicked through satellite images, floor plans, routes of escape. Every detail committed to memory, every plan deliberate. And then she showed them the photograph Miguel Santis. Known as El Carnicero, the room stirred. Operators recognized the name. Some muttered curses. Some went still. Maria's hand brushed her abdomen again as she looked at the image. But when she spoke, her voice was clear. "This is not just another mission. This is him, the one who thinks he owns the lives he scars, the one who tried to brand me. He thought his cuts would break me. Instead, they forged me. And now," she paused, eyes sweeping the room, "now I am coming for him." The silence afterward wasn't disbelief. It was agreement. Soldiers, hardened by years of shadow wars, found themselves nodding, because even they who had lost friends and carried ghosts recognized something in Maria that couldn't be taught. She wasn't just fighting, she was answering. Later, in the quiet after the briefing, Davidson lingered at the back of the room. Reeves approached him, her expression thoughtful. "She's ready," Reeves said. Davidson's jaw tightened. "Or she's walking into the very thing that could destroy her." Reeves shook her head. "No, Colonel. She's already been destroyed. What you're seeing now, this is what she rebuilt herself into." Davidson looked again at Maria, speaking with her team, her posture radiating calm control, and for the first time, he realized something that unsettled him. The question wasn't whether she was fit for the mission. The question was whether the mission was fit for her. Why was the night so quiet as the helicopters cut through the darkness? Maria Vasquez sat in the lead aircraft, her gear strapped tight, her team arrayed around her. The Gulf of Mexico stretched below like a sheet of black glass, wheels up had. Then hours ago, 6 aircraft, coordinated precision, elite operators from Delta, SEALs, Rangers, FBI liaisons embedded. All of them moving toward a single dot on the map, a compound in the Honduran mountains, where 43 lives hung in the balance. Maria's heartbeat stayed steady, but her thoughts pressed heavy. She touched her abdomen, fingers brushing the scar beneath her vest, not with fear, with reminder. Sophia, Carmen, Isabella, the girls who hadn't made it out, the reason she carried herself into this night. Across from her, Chun watched quietly. Their eyes met briefly over the hum of the rotors. No words passed. They didn't need words anymore. 30 minutes out. The crew chief shouted. Maria nodded. Around her, the team checked weapons, tightened straps, whispered last prayers. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to pray, but to focus. She saw the compound floor plan burned into her mind. Entrances, guard rotations, tunnels, and at the center of it all, the face of Miguel Santis, El Carnicero, the butcher, the one who had carved her, then let her live. Was he waiting for her now? The aircraft jolted slightly. Final approach. The plan unfolded with ruthless precision. SEALs cut power to the compound. Deltas hit the perimeter. Rangers secured escape routes. Maria's unit, mixed with FBI specialists, moved toward the holding areas where the captives were believed to be. Night vision turned darkness into green-lit clarity. Shadows danced. Gunfire cracked from the edges as guards reacted too slowly, too chaotically. The compound was surrounded before half of them knew. They were under attack. Maria moved like a blade through the chaos, every step deliberate, every corner checked, every order clipped and calm. They reached the first holding room. Chains. Girls huddled together, terrified. Maria's voice cut through the fierce Spanish. Soft but commanding. We're here. You're safe now. We're getting you out. Some resisted at first, unable to believe. But her presence anchored them. She cut bindings, directed operators to escort them back. Her hands trembled only once. When one girl clutched her wrist with the same desperation she had once carried, Maria squeezed back, steadying both of them. But the fight wasn't over. From deeper in the compound came resistance organized. Heavier automatic fire rattled walls. Operators returned fire, advancing. Maria led a split team down a narrow hall toward the command wing. Intelligence suggested the leader might be there. Each step, her scars seemed to burn hotter. The hall bent, opening into a wide room lit by dim emergency lights. And there, standing calm amid the chaos, was a man she recognized instantly. Tall, broad, scar across his cheek. El Carnicero. Her body froze, then locked into iron. The room blurred, voices distant. All she saw was him, the machete, the laughter, the blade carving across her body. He saw her too, and he smiled. You, he said in Spanish, his voice low and mocking. I thought I broke you. Maria raised her weapon. You failed. Bullets erupted. Operators dove for cover. The butcher's men poured fire into the room. Chaos consumed everything, but Maria kept her eyes on him. She advanced, steady, cutting through the storm with precision. 2 guards dropped. A third fell to Chun's rifle. El Carnicero retreated toward a back stairwell. Firing as he moved, Maria followed, deaf to the shouts behind her. Vasquez, hold! Davidson's voice crackled over coms, but she didn't stop. The stairwell twisted downward into the tunnels. Shadows stretched, the air heavy and damp. Maria's boots pounded stone as she chased. He vanished into the dark ahead. She slowed, weapon raised. Every sense sharpened. Each breath echoed. Each drop of water from the ceiling struck like a drumbeat. Then movement. He lunged from the side. Slamming her against the wall, her rifle skittered across the floor. The machete gleamed in his hand. 4. A heartbeat. She was 17 again. Pain, terror, the weight of helplessness. But then the memory shifted. She remembered Sophia's laughter, Carmen's determination, Isabella's songs in the night, and her fear hardened into fury. She grabbed his wrist mid-swing, forcing the blade aside. Pain lanced her arm, but she twisted, drove her knee into his ribs. He grunted, staggered, but struck back with crushing force. They slammed into the wall again, Stone scraped skin. The machete clattered loose. He sneered, "You'll never escape me. Not you, not the others. You'll always belong to me." Her voice was steel. "No, you belong to me." She drove her elbow into his face. Bones crunching. He reeled. She dove for her sidearm, rolled, came up firing, 2 shots center mass. The butcher stumbled. Blood blooming across his chest. His eyes widened. Shocked not by death, but by defeat. He fell. The tunnel echoed with the sound. Maria stood over him, chest heaving, weapon trained. For a long moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her scar burned beneath her vest, as if answering the wound that had created it. He tried to speak, blood bubbling at his lips, but she silenced him with a final shot. The butcher was gone. The monster who had carved her into something broken had become the reason she rebuilt into something unbreakable. Footsteps pounded behind her. Chun reached her first, weapon raised, eyes widening at the body on the ground. "It's him," Maria said, her voice flat but trembling at the edges. "It's over." Chun's face softened, torn between relief and fear. Relief that he was dead. Fear of what it had cost Maria to do it. Davidson's voice came through comms, calm but urgent. "Status?" Chun answered. "Target eliminated. Compound secured. Civilian safe." There was silence on the other end. Then Davidson's voice, low and steady. "Copy that. Bring them home." Maria holstered her weapon. Her hands were steady now. Her scar no longer burned. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest eased. Not gone, but lighter, as she walked back up the tunnel, past a man who once thought he owned her. She didn't look back, because she knew he was no longer her shadow. He was her past, and she had just chosen her future. Why was the silence after the battle louder than the gunfire itself? The compound in Honduras smoldered, its walls scarred by blasts, its halls littered with the debris of violence. But inside the perimeter, it was not soldiers who mattered now. It was the 43 civilians, women, and children ushered into the night air. Blinking as though light itself was something foreign, Maria Vasquez walked among them. Her rifle hung loose, forgotten at her side. Dirt streaked her face, sweat clung to her neck, and beneath the body armor her scar pulsed with every heartbeat. But for the first time, it did not feel like a burden. It felt like a torch. One of the younger girls clutched her sleeve, refusing to let go. Maria knelt to meet her eyes. "You're safe now," she whispered in Spanish. "They can't hurt you anymore." The girl's lip trembled. "How do you know?" Maria paused. Her hand rose unconsciously to her abdomen, pressing lightly where the machete had once cut her. "Because they tried with me," she said softly. "And I'm still here." The girl stared at her, then slowly nodded. The small fingers tightened around her hand. Not in fear now, but in trust. Behind her, soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, securing prisoners, sweeping for intelligence, loading rescued captives onto transport trucks. The operation was a success by every metric. Davidson knew it. Chun knew it. Even the FBI liaisons whispered about the precision. The 0 civilian casualties. The capture of records that would fracture trafficking networks across borders. But for Maria, success wasn't measured in numbers or files. It was measured in names. Sophia, Carmen, Isabella. 3 who hadn't lived long enough to be saved. 43 tonight who had. As dawn began to break over the mountains, Davidson found her standing alone at the edge of the compound, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You did it," he said simply. Her jaw tightened. "We did it." He studied her profile, the steadiness of her eyes, the way her shoulders carried both pride and weight. For years, he had wrestled with the question of whether her trauma would cripple or forge her. Now he saw the truth. Trauma hadn't made her weak. It had made her relentless. "You hunted him," Davidson said quietly. "Yes." "You killed him." "Yes." "Do you regret it?" Her eyes didn't leave the horizon. "No. He carved this scar to make me his. Instead, it became the mark of his end." She finally turned to him. But I don't feel joy. Just completion. Davidson nodded. He understood. Victory in war was rarely celebration. It was survival, tempered by the weight of what couldn't be undone. Later, as helicopters lifted away from the mountains, Maria sat among the rescued girls. Some leaned against her, too exhausted to stay awake. Others clutched one another, whispering quietly in the rhythm of shared fear. Maria didn't speak. She simply sat with them, her presence saying what words could not. "You're not alone anymore." Chun sat across from her, watching. For months, she had feared this mission would consume Maria, feared that vengeance would hollow her out. But now, looking at the young officer surrounded by those she had saved, Chun felt something different: respect. And something rarer hope. Back in San Antonio, days later, the mission debrief ran long into the night. Charts, maps, timelines, praise for the flawless execution, recognition for intelligence gathered, commendations promised. But when the room emptied, Maria stayed behind. She stood before the projector screen, where El Carnicero's photograph still lingered. His scarred face stared back at her. Frozen in time, she studied it in silence. Then she reached forward, clicked the remote, and shut the image away. It was over. Yet even as she turned, she knew the war was not done. Trafficking networks stretched far beyond one man. New faces would rise to replace him. Shadows would keep taking girls from bus stations. Border towns, quiet streets. But now, those shadows knew her name. Later, in the quiet of her quarters, she unbuttoned her uniform shirt and stood before the mirror. She traced the scar across her abdomen, following its jagged path. Once, it had been a reminder of captivity. Then it became a vow of vengeance. Now it was something else. It was neither wound nor weapon. It was witness. The mark of someone who had been broken and rebuilt. She let her shirt fall, extinguishing the sight. She no longer needed to stare at it to remember who she was. The next morning, Maria stood before her unit, soldiers who had fought beside her, soldiers who had watched her lead with calm fire. She looked at them, then at the recruits training beyond the glass. Young faces, shouting cadences, sweating through drills, believing they were preparing for the worst. But Maria knew the truth. The worst was not gunfire or explosions. The worst was silence in captivity. The worst was the long nights when no one came. That was why she fought. She lifted her voice. Remember this. We are not just soldiers. We are the line between darkness and the innocent. Every raid, every mission, every step, it isn't about glory. It's about the ones waiting in silence, wondering if anyone will come. We don't leave them there. Not ever. The room went still. No one moved. No one doubted. Davidson stood at the back, pride in his eyes. Chun stood beside him, her doubts finally quiet. Reeves, listening, allowed herself a small smile. Maria turned away, not needing applause. Her words were not meant for admiration. They were meant as a promise. That night, she walked alone beneath the Texas sky. The stars stretched endless above. The same stars she had once stared at through bars in a warehouse window, dreaming someone might come, and now she understood. Sometimes, dignity doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't explain. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.